The class stood quiet as their professor fiddled with the imposing hulk of man-shaped metal in the middle of nowhere. It looked like a thing they'd seen in news feeds and the extremely few internet videos they were able to see. But that was nothing compared to the much bigger one off to the left. The girls all stood to attention. A class of 20 high school seniors, a mixture of elves of all kinds, including 2 half-elven orcs. Watching closely from the sidelines, still holding her morning coffee, was the school dean, also an elf. Their teacher was a human named Andrew. They were all surprised to see him walking around because normally he was in a wheelchair. Okay, all set, power core. Safe. Good. Ladies, welcome, Andrew said as he gingerly stepped away from the odd machine. He hobbled towards them and tried to stay steady. Obviously, he was still getting his sea legs. Sorry about the hobbling and such. I'm still getting used to this exo thing. Needs adjusting. Anyway, welcome to your firearms certification test. I have gotten in touch with a buddy of mine, that guy there, he said, gesturing to the human polishing the big machine, to run something both fun and educational, and also legal, which is why he's here. I managed to get permission to borrow one of these for the lesson. He pressed a button on the odd set of armor and it suddenly released an odd hum of energy. It stood to full height of 8 feet tall and with a series of clunky mechanical motions stood to attention. The front of its armor plating splayed open like a blooming flower, exposing its insides. Insides that looked strangely comfortable, with leather-lining seat cushions and a cup holder. For some reason, the larger machine also emitted a strange pulse of energy, its reactor starting up. Both machines were colored in a pale blue, with various parts such as steps, legs, and heavy parts painted a bright yellow or light orange. The smaller machine looked like a fancy version of a set of knight's armor, excluding the flamboyant cloak and large kite shield reminiscent of this kind of style. The larger machine looked like a miniaturized version of the AT-AT from Star Wars, only around 20 feet high and looking significantly more advanced, with a dog-like body and legs, looking significantly more agile and articulate than its movie counterpart. This is the IO Polytechnic Series 2 Type 3 powered armor exoskeleton. Power armor, basically. Today, you're going to learn how to use it in order to earn your advanced armament certifications. Questions? Andrew asked his class. The girls all looked at each other, concerned, scared, and confused. One girl, Leliani, a dark elf, raised a hand after a time. Why do we need an advanced armaments certification, sir? Good question. Do you have any ambitions to join the fleet, become an independent starship pilot or otherwise? If you do, an advanced armaments certification is mandatory, if you intend on deploying any kind of spacecraft or advanced aircraft in any capacity. In short, this certification will allow you to use the big guns on starships and other heavy-grade weapons. This will fast-track you to a career in spaceship ownership, Andrew said. The girl's eyes lit up with excitement. One girl, a wood elf named Emery, excitedly raised her hand. You mean if we get this advanced certification thingy, we're gonna go to space? She asked. Well, no, but it will mean you have completed step 1 in getting a full pilot's license and other certifications you need to own or operate a star-faring vessel. This will fast-track progress if you want to be a starship crew member. If you don't want to do that, though, the certification will allow you to engage in various other industries, including jobs in manufacturing, industry, weapons production, mining. There's a lot you can do with an advanced license, including being able to one day pilot that thing, Andrew replied, gesturing to the giant machine nearby. Some girls bit their lower lips or patted their feet excitedly at the concept. The youngest of the group, a short sprite elf, raised her hand. Yes, Kalia, you have a question. Yes, sir. Where's your wheelchair? She asked, tilting her head curiously. Oh, that. I forgot. Right. This is an exoskeleton, Andrew said and walked to them so they could take a closer look. Andrew's body was covered in some kind of thin metallic skeleton of some kind, almost imperceptible at a distance. It was underneath his clothing, but there was enough of it he could show it off to them. It's basically the same technology as that powered armor suit, except... Andrew turned around to show them the cables and wiring poking into the back of his neck. This one is a sort of semi-implant. I finally got approved to use a prototype earlier this month. But anyway, I'll explain that better later. Time for you to do your work. Hey, Morty, they're good to go, Andrew yelled. The pilot that owned the big one jumped down with a loud thud on the ground and walked up to each girl, shaking her hand with a smile. Hello there, ladies. My name is Mortimer. I will be your certified instructor for today. Today I will be teaching you how to use the powered exosuit, and more importantly how to use its advanced suite of weaponry. Your teacher is going to have himself a sit-down and I'll take over your lesson today, Mortimer said with a chuckle. I'd forgotten how exhausting it was to walk everywhere, Andrew said as he sat in a chair. It'll take you a while to get used to it, Corporal, just don't rest too long. Need to activate those new nerves and blood vessels you got, Mortimer said as Andrew chuckled dismissively. Mortimer brought his students close to the powered suit and showed them how it worked. Kalia, the smallest of the elves, was volunteered for the job of sitting inside it and showing how everything functioned. I wasn't able to get any real approval for one of the more advanced models. Those things are very expensive, so this was the best I could get at short notice. Now, can anybody tell me how it actuates? Mortimer asked. The girls all looked closely at the machine, passed their adorably small classmate, and took careful note of its interior. One girl raised her hand. Does it have something to do with all these dots that are all over the place? Is it something to do with the hexagon pattern? Correct. This is a principle we got from an old anime called Appleseed. The very same technology used for animation motion capture is deployed here to move the machine. Each of these dots in the internal hex is a small microcamera. This microcamera feeds the muscle movements into the internal computer, which then turns that into motion. Anybody have any idea how that works? Mortimer asked as he demonstrated by moving Kalia's arm, which then moved the Mech's arm. The girls glanced at each other. Then each one took a turn to use poor Kalia as a puppet to try to figure out how it worked. In the end, Kalia herself spoke up. It doesn't look like it's too fast or anything, so I'm guessing that the pilot also wears some kind of undersuit that connects to the thing. Correct. Well spotted. Each pilot for these early models also wears an advanced nanosuit that has special things woven into the fabric that better interface with the system, making the cameras more effective at capturing motions from the pilot. It can work without it, but not as effectively. We don't need that for this, so that's why you won't be putting one on. Now out of there, quick. Let me show you how this works. Mortimer asked and gently helped Kalia out of the machine. He hopped in and started explaining how to put it on. Make sure you are seated properly and comfortable. Make sure feet are in stirrups provided. Now you push this purple button here and... He pressed the button and the legs, waist, and feet of the machine closed up, encircling his legs and torso. There. Now put your hands in the control pods here and press the trigger under your left pinky finger. It's this one here, he said, then demonstrated. The armor suit fully closed around him, locking itself in place. Now this is the important part. Pay very close attention, okay? If there is an emergency, you yell out, "Eject," he said with a loud shout. The machine immediately popped open and the plating parted. Then Mortimer popped out like the machine just acted like a Pez dispenser. Just in case something goes wrong or you feel panicked, just yell eject. The machine will effectively spit you out and you can go running. If you need to get out normally, just push that pinky button and then the purple button again to get out. Everybody got that? Mortimer asked. The girls all nodded their heads in agreement. Good. Now, this is what we're going to be using for the job, Mortimer said as he moved over to the bench and opened a gun case. This is the Barrett M20 at 255mm bolt rifle, the Smith & Wesson Patriot 30mm revolver, and the Kalashnikov KA-408 AK-DMR platform rifle. You will be using these to earn your certifications. The girls looked a bit scared at the sight of these massive guns, clearly not built for any human without mechanized assistance. They had gone through basic firearms training and even been to a shooting competition before, but never used anything quite like these monsters. Imposing, aren't they? But you know, I want to make this a bit more interesting, Mortimer said, rubbing his hands together in an evil fashion. Morty, don't do anything I ain't allowed to do, Andrew said from his seat. Don't worry, bruh, it's all above board. I have a fun idea. After your courses are complete, we will have a little contest. Winner of the contest gets to use the big gun on the big mech. How's that sound? Mortimer said. The girls were taken by surprise by this suggestion and glanced at each other in surprise. They all jumped squealing, me first, as they crowded around. Mortimer decided to go with alphabetical order, starting with a dark elven girl named Amari. Each girl had to tie her hair down and secure it properly before she could enter, and one by one they got into the suit, faffed about a bit to get used to how the controls worked, and stood up to the firing range. The exercise was less about firing the gun and more about the safety, control, and discipline needed to use the weapon, as well as basic mech controls and operation. Amari stepped up to the firing range and was made to fire a full volley from each gun. Mortimer stood next to her and gestured at the intended target, a bank of sandbags on a hill. Right. So far so good. Now 5-round mag for the Barrett, 10-round mag for the Kalash, 3 rounds in the cylinder for the revolver. Fire it all, following safety protocol, of course. Extra points for actually hitting the target, Mortimer said. Yes, sir. Like this. Okay, check sights. Magazine loaded. Ready to fire. Check the perimeter. Safety off. She yelled the last part and readied herself to fire. The bulky machine was a bit unwieldy for the elf girl, and it took her a bit to get used to it. She fired off one shot, the blast echoing through the valley and a puff of dust appearing in front of the muzzle. The bullet streaked through the air and blasted into the side of the mountain 5 or 6 feet from its intended target. Gently now. Take it easy. Panic is dangerous when holding a gun. Remember, discipline, Andrew said as he got back on his feet and stood next to her. Amari put the safety on and took a breath, limbering herself up. She readied herself again and fired another shot. This time hitting close, just behind the target, slightly to the left. You don't have to compensate for the recoil like a normal gun. The machine does it for you even though it's a higher caliber. Loosen your arms up, don't twist your wrist to absorb the recoil. Don't forget to check your grip, Andrew said. Yes, sir. It's a bit weird how this thing works, Amari said. I know. It takes some getting used to, but it looks like you have your range. Try again, Mortimer said. Amari readied herself again and fired a shot, this time hitting her target and releasing a puff of dust from the sandbag target. Her friends were unable to celebrate as she quickly released 2 more shots, both of which hit their target. Amari ejected the spent magazine and stood to attention, rifle down at her side. Good. Perfect discipline, perfect safety technique. Good shots too, 3 out of 5, not bad for a newbie. Now the revolver. 3 rounds, Mortimer said. Amari nodded in response and put the rifle down, picking up the revolver. She loaded it carefully and checked her perimeter to make sure it's clear. She held the revolver with both hands, then cocked it ready to fire. She genuinely didn't think the gun had that much recoil, so it took her by surprise when it tried to kick itself out of her hands. She regained her composure and tried a different stance, using the machine's weight on the gun's handle to absorb the recoil. She fired 2 more shots, one of which hit the target. She ejected the spent casings and put the gun on the table. Very good. Got a bit iffy there at that first one, but you handled it well. Do not be afraid to change stances if you need to. Next, the DMR, Andrew said. She picked up the rather vicious-looking weapon and prepared herself to fire it. Mortimer directed her to lay down and use the bipod on the gun. Okay, don't have to hit any targets. This one's about control. Fire at full auto and we'll see how you handle it, Mortimer said. Amari nodded and lay down, using the concrete platform they're standing on to stabilize herself. She readied herself, checked her quarters and made sure it was safe, then unleashed. 2 seconds later, the mag was expended and she was gasping for breath from the shock. She stood up, put the gun down, then let herself shiver a bit as she came down from the adrenaline high. Very good. Amari made a good baseline. Let's see who can do better. The one who gets the most hits wins and gets to play with the big Mech. So far the score is 3-1-1. Let's do better, Mortimer said. The rest of the class all took their turn, with the shocking outcome of the sprite elf Kalia coming out on top, with a score of 4-3-6. Kalia was more than just a little intimidated at the sight of the gigantic beast as Mortimer lowered the access ladder to the cockpit. Andrew went up with her to act as supervisor as Mortimer put her in the gunner's seat. Holy crap, this is fancy, she squeaked as she put her seatbelt on. It is, isn't it? Military versions are a lot more complex than this one. This one is a civilian-grade variant for sporting contests. Military versions are also a lot more heavily armed than Binky here, Mortimer said. Andrew and Kalia both looked at him with a crooked brow. Binky. Yeah, that's his name. So let me get into a good spot and you can see what he does, Mortimer replied. The machine reared up to full height, moving around exactly like a dog as its enormous steel feet slammed into the sand, and Mortimer expertly moved it into position in front of the firing target. Mortimer then showed Kalia how to aim. The entire head of the machine moved as it did, just like the head of a dog. We had an idea for something like this back in the late 1980s from a movie series called Star Wars. It was called the AT-AT All-Terrain Armored Transport. Damn beautiful beast, good concept, but the movie version was too big, fat, and clunky to be of any real use in combat. So we instead took inspiration from DARPA and Cambridge robotics programs. Same principle, different deployment. The entire head acts as a turret because of the whole design of the doggo. It's very articulate, Mortimer said as he demonstrated its operation. Okay, wait. If this thing is so good, why do you use tanks and planes and stuff like from back in the 20th century? If you got these, why do you still have tanks in service? She asked. Simple kitten. A standard Army MBT costs around $1.2 million to build and maintain with a combat life of 30 to 50 years in service. This magnificent beast has a price tag of $30 million and a service life of maybe 20 years. Andrew replied with a smirk. The number made her jaw drop and she nearly choked on her own shock. Uh-huh. Yes, specialized equipment like this is made for special operations or as a support vessel for less expensive, more numerous military operations. We don't deploy 100 of these things on the front line. In any case, here's what he's packing. A 240mm cannon, a twin-linked plasma bolter, and 1 8-barrel minigun. I'll let you spend a full mag on each and 10 seconds on the minigun, because ammo is pricey for this thing. Can't let you have too much fun, can we? Mortimer said and readied the machine to firing position. Oh, okay. So, if I can see this right, Hold the joystick with your right hand to aim. Press buttons on the trigger to fire. Use that heads-up display screen thing to look what I'm shooting at. Right. The two men nodded in approval, and Mortimer made sure to have his own hand on a secondary targeting system to make sure she didn't do anything silly or crazy. Kalia fiddled with it to see if she could figure it out and eventually got used to the motion of the head. She lined up the targeting reticule on the sandbag target they'd been shooting at. Okay. I'm assuming no matter how big the gun, the procedures are the same. Ready to fire. Check the perimeter. Clear area. Safety off. She yelled the last words and gently squeezed the trigger. The main cannon fired a high-explosive shell, the ground shuddering from the explosion. The whole body of the machine wrenched back to absorb the recoil. The shell screamed through the air and hit just to the left of the target, blowing a huge crater into the side of the hill and displacing some of the sandbags. Kalia was allowed to fire 2 more shells, completely obliterating the target into piles of shredded material and dust plumes. That was awesome. She growled excitedly. They held her back and calmed her down before the next one. She took some breaths and collected herself, then moved to the plasma bolters. Lacking any target owing to her previous attack, decided to fire into the crater she left behind to make a bigger hole. The blasters sounded exactly like the AT-AT's blasters, but left their impact points as blazing piles of molten glassy goop. She fired a few volleys of blaster bolts, turning the hillside into a strange mass of swirling, semi-molten glass. Once again her instructors had to calm her down before she went for the Gatling gun. She aimed at her target, the molten glass goop, and produced 3 bursts of fire, 3 solid beams of molten metal bullets at 5 seconds each, that turned the molten goop into a strange form of semi-hardened art. Kalia could barely contain her excitement at how much fun it was, and her teacher Andrew decided to cut the rest of the fun off before she ended up getting too excited and getting either herself or someone else hurt. Each girl earned her certification plus some extra credit to boast about at school.